morning. I'm Jim Harwell. I happen to be the president of the Elk Valley Forestry Association, which, how many of you are new? This is your first field trip with us. We have some new people? Okay. Just for background information, Elk Valley Forestry Association now is, I think, 5 years old, and we represent 4 counties, Lincoln, Marshall, Moore, and Bedford counties. We try to have 2 field days every year, one in the spring and one in the fall. We picked this one because this is a unique area in the county, and Mr. Grayson Ray is, where's Grayson? Back here. From Federal Public Utilities is going to give us some history of this area, tell us what it's about. This is to go back about 50 years. There's a water supply in this area that's a part of the county and the city water system, and he's going to tell us that. The way we're going to do is we're going to walk up the road about 100 yards here. There's a steel gate. We're going to go there, cross a little spring branch, and walk back up in the hollow. And Grayson is going to give us the background, the history of the area, what the importance to federal public utilities, and talk to us a little bit about what federal public utilities is planning to do with this area, and what they're thinking perhaps in terms of timber harvest. Grayson, are you going to talk about timber harvest at all, or at least tell us what the general plan is?
No, when we get back there, we'll discuss it.
Okay, all right. Well, we've got Chris Carney, who's here in the orange vest. Chris is with the Tennessee Forestry Division, and he's going to talk to us about timber harvest, and we're just going to do that once we get back up in the back. Mike Sherrill is right here. Mike is Tennessee Department of Agriculture, a water quality person, and I understand Federal Public Utilities brought your own water person too, so maybe we can have a little conversation back and forth. But that's sort of the three parts of the program. We'll start with the history, talk a little bit about the timber management plan, and then the water quality. Mike's going to talk about best management practices, and for you that are not don't understand the vocabulary of the logging industry, timber industry, best management refers to how to manage the buffer zones along streams, particularly when you're cutting timber, how to get timber out without dragging it across the streams and polluting the water and that type of thing. So those are the 3 basic areas we want to cover this morning. So we're going to walk all the way to the back. This is, go up here, we'll cross a little spring branch, walk up the trail. It's a pretty easy walk because the trail is clean. One thing I'll mention, this is rattlesnake country. People say if you're looking for rattlesnakes, this is where you'll find them. I think cool as it is this morning, they're all still asleep. We hope they are, but I would just, for safety purposes, stay on the trail, and we'll let Tom Hall and the forestry guys go in front and kick the snakes out of the way if they're in it. So that's
Jim,
just...
if I could, I'm sorry. If we could, as we're walking back, could we get Mr. Tom to stop and identify? When we were here back in the spring, he identified several different plants and things that were sort of unusual. And see if Mr. Tom would, if he sees anything on the way.
Mr. Ray, we've tagged probably 25 trees, species with yeah, they'll be tagged. You'll see them along the foot trail.
And what about the preacher in the pulpit or the, whatever the...
Jack in the pulpit.
Jack in the pulpit.
We'll look for it.
Don, I don't know if your mic is picking up Grayson back there in the back or not, but he was talking about identifying trees, and Tom Hall here with Tennessee Forestry Department, and Tom is a member of our association and one of our program director. We thank Tom for getting our program together. He's marked some trees and some, I guess, some wild plants back there along the way, have identified. One other thing I wanted to mention is Eddie Hall here.
Eddie's coming at lunch.
Eddie's coming at lunch. Well, I mention Eddie because Eddie owns this land that we're tromping around on and we're setting up on. I just wanted to thank him for letting us use his property. We certainly do appreciate that.
Did you make a honeybee warning?
We haven't done a honeybee warning, but there's a honeybee nest right here, and they're going in right under the on the edge of the, what am I trying to say,
Meter box?
the meter box, yeah. The power meter. There happens to be a ball-faced hornet nest around back, which is kind of where we'll be eating, but it's up about 20 feet, so unless it's got some non-human primates that are going to climb up the wall, I don't think we need to worry about that. And just for general interest's sake, right across the road there's a stretch cab white, looks like a Ford FPU truck parked over there. There's a big tree right beyond that. There's another beehive in that tree. So there's something right here in this area that's attracting the bees, which is good because, as you know, the honeybees are getting kind of scarce these days. And any natural areas we have for them to work and to live, that's good. But wanted to warn you about this area because once it warms up, the bees will be working in and out of the barn. We don't want anybody to get stung. So, Tom, where's Tom? Oh, you want to say something about a plaque you were going to present?
Well,
Come
I'd
up
like
here
to
by the
introduce
table.
Jonathan Boggs. Jonathan Boggs is Assistant District Forester out of our Highland Rim District, and he's stationed up at Burns near Dixon. And I appreciate him coming down, and he's got something he's wanting to present to the association here.
Okay. I appreciate being here today, and I'm glad y'all invited me down. I work with several landowner associations across the Highland Rim District, across Middle Tennessee, and I have to say I've been to a few of y'all's field days down here, come to one of y'all's dinner. Y'all fed me real good, and I appreciate that. And you know, I'm a forester. Tom's a forester. We have some other foresters here, and we all have a passion for forestry. We do it for a living, and I'm so proud to see so many landowners out here like you guys that have a passion for forestry as well. And also, you guys remember back, it's been close to a year now, there was some budget talk in the state government that they were going to be cutting out the Division of Forestry's Forest Management Division, and you know, they had us all up in arms, and I know you guys were supportive of us, and you really backed us up, and some of you guys went out and talked with our state representatives and other politicians to really help us on that. And on behalf of the Division of Forestry, we'd like to present this award. It's called the Friends of Forestry Award, and we're just presenting this to the Elk Valley Forestry Association just to show our appreciation of y'all and the passion you have for forestry. And without landowners like yourself, we wouldn't have a job, and we enjoy getting out and talking with you and helping you out and just getting to know you and knowing your properties as well. So just give yourselves a big round of applause, and thank you for being there for us.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Harwell.
These fellows from the Forestry Department have really been great in showing up and talking to us and sharing their knowledge with us. He got up pretty early this morning in order to get here, so we appreciate you coming. Mike Sherrill also drove a long way, so we appreciate you fellows coming. We appreciate the local forestry people too. So thank you very much. We're honored to accept this, and we'll put it in a place of safekeeping. I'm not sure where. We don't have an office, but we'll find a place to put it. Perhaps in the David Qualls is putting our meal together. David's with the University of Tennessee Agriculture Extension Service, and he has an office, so we can kind of work out of his office, and we'll put that up there. So thank you very much. Okay, Grayson, are you ready to get started?
Yes, sir.
All right.
You guys ready to-
All right. Well, let's. Where did Tom? There's Tom. Tom, you want to lead us, and we'll just take a walk back up in the hollow, and we'll start from back there.
Get all the walking done.
You need to harvest. I walk down and you can go down into the fish hatchery property.
That disc you made me, I cannot tape over it to make any more.
We're gonna let you get your photograph.
No, we're breaking the law. Why is it messing your...
I'll step up on this mountain of dirt, because I'm a little bit short.
I can see everybody. Good morning. Glad to see everybody out this morning. And Mr. Tom picked a gorgeous morning. It's absolutely fine. And we appreciate Mr. Tom for putting this together for us. And it's a very interesting piece of property here, as all of you can see. I wish I had that water running out of my farm up there high this morning, because it's mighty dry, and y'all can see, as dry as it is, it's still putting the water out. So it's really, really something. I brought, actually, this morning, Mr. David Posey from, David is our water guru there at FPU, and he will discuss the water quality with you. And the reason that I had Mr. Tom, and the reason we got involved together is back in the spring, we had actually talked about cutting some of these trees. I was raised on a farm and had a lot of big timber on it like this, and as all you guys know, there comes a point in time where timber starts going another way. And so we're just shooting the idea around about cutting the trees. At this point in time, we are not. We have written it out of our plan. It's a very environmentally sensitive area, and we don't want to damage the area at all. So at this point in time, we're not gonna do anything. We may eventually, at some point in time, try to upgrade this pipe that's coming out of the spring, going back toward the plant down at the front of Teal Hollow. But we're not gonna be cutting any trees at this point in time. But I'll let David talk to you a little bit about the water quality and our plans as far as using the water out of Teal Hollow. And when he gets through, if you have any questions, just shoot them at us. We'll try to answer them. If not, sure we've got somebody around here that'll give us a answer.
Hello everybody, welcome to Teal Hollow Spring number 1. I call this spring number 1. We have 3 springs actually on this road. We have one about a half a mile up the way, set on about 14 acres, that was purchased back in 1944, as well as another spring across from the water treatment plant you may have seen on the way here. That's set on about 7 acres, that was purchased in 1942. Property we're standing on today was purchased it began being purchased from the Carters way back in 1923 and 24. And they bought it in about 4 increments. And what they did, by the time 1926, November of 1926, we actually have the deed. They had purchased the last 44 acres of the property that we're standing on for about $1,000 for a bargain price, much less. But they bought it for, and from that point on, the superintendent at the time, along with Mr. I believe it's Widner or Widener, they had laid an 8-inch line from here all the way up the road to the water treatment plant. Well, not to the water treatment plant, but through Kelso and through Fayetteville. They used that water for a period of time, and up until 1944 or 1994, it had only been chlorinated. But as you know, tightening regulations from the state, this is considered a groundwater source under the direct influence of surface water, which means that there are harmful microbials that can get in there as well from rain runoff, and if there's a source nearby that can interfere with it as well, you know, as you've seen a creek that runs alongside the road, that's in this case that's a creek. We started filtering it, started adding a coagulant which removes some of the dirt out of the water. Very small chemicals are added, not a whole lot. We add a very tiny amount of coagulant because there's not a whole lot of dirt when there is dirt in the water, you know, from a big rain. And we add a little bit of bleach at the plant now instead of chlorinating the line. Right now, the plant is shut down. We have it shut down and we're currently using it as a backup water treatment source. It can produce, along these 3 springs, along with the plant, can produce up to about 600,000 gallons a day. It's made it for 86 years, since 1920, or 84 years, I believe it is, 1926. It's made it that long, and it's been through a few droughts. One back in 2007, we were using the plant at that time, no interruptions at all. You know, that kind of gives you a little historical perspective of where all this came from. But 1994 is when we built the plant, and we started sending it to the clear well at the water treatment plant, where we started using it to send to our customers in the city. The water quality is spectacular out here. I'm sure you probably, I don't know, maybe some of you landowners out here have drank it before. I probably wouldn't recommend drinking it just by itself now, but what we plan on doing is using this water source in the future on a daily basis, more so than just an emergency backup. We have a couple plans in place that we'd like to explore, but the plan for this site is to leave it as you see it. It's been maintained for the last 84 years the way it is as you see it right now. We plan on keeping it that way. We obviously will go through the proper channels if there's ever a time we need to repair a line or whatnot, but the plan as of right now is to maintain it the way it is. The water quality, let's talk about that. The natural pH of this water is about a 6.9, which I don't know if you have some chemists out here, but that's pretty much neutral as it gets. You know, almost 7's a neutral. It runs a little bit on the soft side. The alkalinity and the hardness run about 51 to 68 milligrams per liter. But the natural quality of this water is spectacular. It is organic free. And organics are important in the water treatment business because when you add chlorine to a high level of organics, they can cause harmful disinfection byproducts, which are kind of over a period of time can cause cancer. So with organic free water, you can add chlorine to it and not have the worry of contaminating or raising the level of your disinfection byproducts. But like I said, if you have any questions or if you have anything you'd like to ask about the quality of water here or the quality of water even at the Elk River plant, you know, you can ask me now or call me at the Fayetteville Public Utilities Water Treatment Plant. My name is David Posey, and it was nice meeting you.
Tell us again how many gallons per hour or minute that the combination of the 3.
Okay, the combination of the 3 springs, we have it set up right now. We can pinch it off at valves. We have it set up to do about 350,000 gallons a day, but it can produce up to 600,000 gallons. Right now, you're probably at about 100,000 gallons. I mean, 100 gallons a minute right now coming out. Have you seen the overflow over here? What happens is we had the plant shut down, and water deadheads at the plant, and we want it to come back through here through the overflow instead of, you know, just out into the lagoon and into a creek. We'd rather it come back onto the property.
Well, explain to us why there's so much water coming out of here. Is this a low spot for many acres around?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's just a natural low spot.
How many acres around do you think would be feeding this area?
Oh goodness. Right, we own the 66 acres here, and I felt like, you know, that may have been deemed necessary to own that much property. So I would imagine everything you see here is this low spot. You probably have all of the groundwater tributaries probably to this spring. There's no telling. There's really no telling. To be honest with you. I'm sorry, sir.
I've got a rookie question about water quality.
Yes, sir.
Sulfur content, basically. We live over in cold water in the aquifer that supplies about 75% of the water for Lincoln County, right? Aquifer.
Yes, sir.
So my question to you is, on our property, I think we've got a lot of sulfur. 1, where does the sulfur come from? 2, is it a problem? 3, how do you deal with it?
The sulfur naturally occurs in a lot of groundwater sources. Just occurs naturally in the ground as well. Here, the sulfur content is very low. I mean, you would smell it. I think sulfur has a distinct smell. You can smell it whenever you pour it in a glass.
You can taste it.
Yes, sir. And as well, you can taste it. We don't have a sulfur problem at all out here. I've never actually measured the sulfur content, to be honest with you, but we don't have that problem. We don't have any smell, any content whatsoever. But where it comes from is just naturally occurring groundwater source. It comes from I'm guessing the ground. The mixture of the minerals and all that stuff in the ground, and it just comes out in the water.
but there's none here, but in other places there may be.
There may be in other, and a lot of, it's common in groundwater sources. Not so much surface water, and this is groundwater under direct influence of surface water as well. So that may be what's helping us out a little bit.
Thank you.
If y'all start pulling water out of here daily, will it affect people around us?
Oh no, sir. Actually, we actually used to use this daily, but due to constant service interruptions, what happens is you have a plant that's called a satellite plant, and what it means is a satellite plant is that you don't have, it doesn't serve a high amount of customers, so you don't have to have somebody there all day as long as it's hooked to automatic actuators and alarms, so that it'll cut the plant off if it ever rises above the limitations set forth by the state. So what happens is we have it shut down because when the people on that line, when that plant kicks off, those customers are out of water. 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, you know, we have a gentleman that calls us. You know, he lives up along the road. He calls us every time. So what we've done is we started back feeding from our actual water treatment plant in town. But as the plan, we were planning to make this a constant every day and blend it in with the water as we did before. But the only thing we got to do is address constant service interruptions, and the way to do that would be either installing membrane filters at the water treatment plant. Out, you know, if you need to call me, and I'll explain the all. There's two different types.
I know my water's coming out of the same system here, and I just wondered
Sure.
if it was going to affect me.
Oh no, sir. No, it'll actually be in fact, your water quality would be better. The pressure may or may not drop a little
Now, this
bit.
don't have nothing to do with my pressure. I'm on a well,
Yes, sir.
but I'm not up the top of the hill up here.
It shouldn't affect you at all. I mean, I would imagine it's been used since 1926.
If y'all start taking it out, though,
Oh, well, not necessarily. The plan is not to just necessarily peak it out. The plan is to use the water at about the rate that we were using before. You know, we don't plan on just running it full blast to town.
The only time, I'm sorry, David, the only time, Billy, that would probably max it out, this would be used as a contingency water.
Sure.
And David's used this scenario. What if a fuel truck fell off the bridge coming into town? Well, that's upstream of our pumps. What if we couldn't pump water out of the river? We'd have to provide some sort of fire protection, you know, basic necessities to town. We'd be able to use this as a backup.
Yeah, that would be the only time you would ever may see something like that maxed out. We don't plan on using the whole 600,000 gallons. Probably could produce more than that. It's never really been maxed out before. So what we plan on doing is keeping it, you know, around 400,000 gallons like it has been over the years, without interruption.
And also, Dr. Beasley was telling me last night that he's got a picture at the museum, and we tried to find it this morning and couldn't put our hands on it, of some workers actually laying this line. And from our best understanding is that this thing was put in by hand all the way to town.
That's right.
And I'm sure a lot of you guys that are from around here that probably know folks that were involved in the construction, but it's...
You're not drawing from it's just natural flow that you're pulling off of,
That's
right?
correct. That's correct.
So
It's just naturally occurring springs. We didn't create it. It's just there naturally occurring, and I've never seen it since I've been here for the 5 years I've been here, and of course over the period of since 1926 they've been using it. I've never seen it give us any problems at all. As far as flow.
600,000 gallons a day, it still is going to have some flow left, right?
Absolutely, but what we're going to plan on doing is we will work with any customer that has. If we're giving somebody a problem with anything that we end up doing out here, of course, you know, we're going to listen to all comers and knock it out, because we have the Elk River. We can just slow the flow down here. We don't need it, but we'd like to share this water, this spectacular water, with everybody in town as well, because it's just a good quality of water. Plus, it's organic free.
Well, if he's up on the hill, he would be the first one to know if the water table was
That's
dropping.
absolutely. So, in fact, if me and him can actually, I can exchange numbers with you, and I mean, we're talking several years down the road. We plan on using this as an emergency
I
backup.
figure out I'm on the same water tap that you are, because I'm 100 and something feet deep.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I'm on the
Yeah,
same-
absolutely. We will work with you. No problem whatsoever.
I
You
just wondered.
yes, sir. If it causes you any problem, for sure.
Don't worry.
You're gonna give us a call, right? Is there any other question? Yes, sir.
I have one other question. You say, how about the cooperation between the city facilities and ownership of this and the county? The county has a bigger problem. We have to have wells, different places.
Yes, sir.
And so is there any interface there so that the county can benefit from it probably at a cost, but
Well, actually, the way it works right now, we have three different sites, Grayson.
Yes.
We sell county water from our system whenever they get low from their wells. We sell them, especially in the summertime. This past summer, we sold a lot to them. We are on a constant communication basis with Mr. Mike Cooper at the county, and we sell water anytime they need it. As far as a direct flow from this spring, it's probably, you know, it's going to come with the mixture of what we have at the water treatment plant. But they have had problems with their wells. Of course, they are building a water treatment plant, I believe, in the next few years on the Elk River by Harms Dam. I don't know how long it is away, but that's going to help them with their wells as well. So they probably won't even have to buy much water from us anymore after that. So, any other questions? Oh, he said, you scared me. I thought
Let me
you
step in here just a minute. Grayson,
Yes, sir.
and thank you very much for the presentation here. We kind of got surprised when Grayson said they're not planning on cutting any timber. So our timber harvest presentation today is going to be sort of a theoretical presentation, but I think that would still be helpful in letting people understand what would be involved if timber was to be harvested. So Tom Hall, our area forester, has sort of set up a place right up the trail here, just a few feet, and we're going to go up there. If you'll follow the gentleman in the orange vest, he's going to talk to us a little bit about timber harvest and that type of thing, and then we'll go to our next speaker. Okay, this is our second stop, and this is Chris Carney, Tennessee Forestry Division. He's going to talk to us a little bit about timber harvest, and as we found out a while ago, the city or federal public utilities really does not plan to do any timber harvest. So Chris's presentation is going to be a bit theoretical, but I think it'll still be helpful for all of us to know understand what he's talking about. So Chris, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Harwell. Well, my name is Chris Carney. Like Dr. Harwell said, I'm happy to be here. I work in Cannon County with the Division of Forestry, and I probably wouldn't do this. Tom asked me to come down here and do it, so Tom's kind of like my mentor. I blame him for getting me into forestry. So,
Chris, if I could say one thing, I tell you folks, I'm not the one that makes this possible. It's people like Dr. Harwell and our board of directors and your extension leaders. Man, he's putting a lot more hours in on this than I ever thought about doing. So don't look at me about, yeah, it's people like, it wouldn't happen if it wasn't.
well, what I'm going to talk to you right here, you see orange flagging kind of scattered around. Whenever a forester comes to your property and you're thinking about doing a forest management plan, a lot of times what's involved is conducting what we call a timber inventory or a cruise. Well, some people ask, how do you do that? What's involved? Well, first off, why would you do an inventory? Well, there's a couple of reasons why a timber inventory is needed. First off, it tells you the value of the standing trees in your forested tract. It also tells you species composition, diameter, class, distribution. So these are all important things that in order for you to make a prescription or a recommendation, you need to know these things before you make that decision. When you're talking about timber inventories, there's basically three types. The first type is a 100% tally. What that means is you're basically tallying every merchantable tree out in the forested tract. Now, a lot of times if you've got 100 acres or 50 acres, that's hard to do. It takes a lot of time. The second type is what they call a fixed radius plot cruise. What that entails is you basically have a tape. If you choose a plot representation or a size, say 1/10 of an acre, and 1/10 of an acre is 37 feet and 3 inches. So if this is plot center, you would go 37 feet 3 inches all the way around and tally every tree that's merchantable in that plot. And then you would have 1/10 of an acre representation of that forested tract. Well, that's probably the second widely used technique of cruising. But that gets kind of difficult, especially in the summertime when you've got everything's green. It depends on how thick, especially if it's a young stand, you're measuring a lot of trees. The third type, and the type I'm going to talk about specifically right here, is point sampling, variable plot sampling. It deals with basically a little tool that I'm sure a lot of landowners have seen Tom or another forester use, which is a prism. The concept is the angle of this prism is roughly, I think it's 1.74 degrees. So if a tree, if the size of the tree is wider than the angle of this, it shows up in, it would consider in, and you would count that tree as in. This is kind of hard to explain, so bear with me. So you would go around and measure each tree that's considered in your site. Well, as you can see, there's 9 trees in this plot. The angle of this 1.74 degrees, that represents into what they call a basal area factor into 10. So each tree that's in counts as 10. So if there's 9 trees, that's a 90 basal area for this plot. When I say basal area, you're like, well, what is basal area? Well, basal area is basically the cross-sectional part of the tree measured at 4.5 foot above ground. And when, in terms of what you actually do or what measurements are taken in each plot, you're always going to measure the diameter of the tree. Okay, and the diameter of the tree is always measured at 4.5 foot. That's called diameter at breast height. And the other thing you're always going to measure is what they call merchantable height. How many merchantable logs are in that tree that you're looking at? And when we cruise it, we usually cruise it in 16-foot log increments. So a half a log would be 8 foot. Now that doesn't mean a timber buyer or a logger is going to cut everything in 8-foot and 16-foot sections. Of course, you could have 10-foot sections, 12-foot sections, but for the sake of cruising, we usually just do 16-foot increments. There are other terms involved with cruising that you'll hear. Trees per acre is another one. It involves how many trees of a certain diameter class are in that forested area. If you've got 30% 12-inch trees, if you've got 40% 18-inch trees. Board feet is another simple term. People ask, well, what do you sell timber or lumber or timber in? And it's usually the unit of measure is board foot. A 1 board foot equals 1 foot by 1 foot by 1 inch green unsurfaced lumber. Okay, that equals 1 board foot. And 1,000 board feet equals 1 MBF. And the reason I say that is when you see pricing charts, a lot of it'll say a price per MBF, and that's what it means. Well, after you're cruising each tree, sometimes some trees, if you're looking at a prism or angle gauge, a tree could appear to be in or out. It's kind of on the iffy side. It's right on the line. So how do you determine if that tree is actually in or out? Well, there's a simple method to do that. If you're using a basal area factor 10, which most of the time what we cruise is a 10 factor prism. This beach over here, if I'm looking, this is plot center, and if I'm looking at it, it looks to be pretty close. I'm not really 100% sure if it's in the plot or out of the plot. So what I would do to determine if it is in or out, I would basically run a tape, go measure the diameter of the tree, which it was 18.9 inches, and then I would put the diameter tape on the middle of the tree and run the distance from that tree to the plot center. Well, you take the diameter of that tree and you multiply that by what they call plot radius factor, and that's 2.75. And that gives you a distance in feet. If that distance in feet is less than or equal to what the distance between the center of the tree and the plot center, that's considered in, okay? That tree was actually 51.9 feet. and from what I measured it was 53 feet. So it was off by 2 feet, so I would not count it. Roughly, there are rough estimates on how to determine volume. You're talking about volume per acre. How much volume standing timber are there per acre? Well, there are shortcut methods that you can use. One is actually totaling how many, for each plot, you total how many merchantable logs are in that plot. And roughly there's 27 16-foot logs in this plot. You would multiply that, depending on what volume scale you're using, which there's two main volume scales that we use in the southeast. One is the Doyle, which is the most widely accepted of hardwoods, and the other one is the International 1/4 inch. If you want to use the Doyle, you would add up all the number of logs, 16-foot logs, which there's 27, and you multiply that by 400. And that gives you a rough estimate, a very, very, very rough estimate of how much volume per acre based on this one plot. Okay, so you would never use that, I would never recommend you use that number to sell timber, but it gives you an idea, something to start with, okay? Roughly this was roughly 10,000 foot per acre based on this one plot. And that's using the shortcut method. And if you wanted to use international, which you would multiply it by 600, that jumps it up to 16,000 feet an acre. So you can see the big difference there. Well, so what are some tools you need to bring to cruise timber? Well, you've got a plot center. Usually you can have a flag. And one important thing to remember whenever foresters are cruising, you can't just walk around plot center and look through here. The prism needs to stay over plot center as you rotate around the plot. That's important. What I'm holding right here is what they call a Biltmore stick. This is a tool that you can use to measure diameter, and on one side of the stick is what they call a merit hypsometer. And this is used to determine merchantable height. If you pace back, say, 100 foot from the tree, and you hold this 25 inches, it tells you on one side how many merchantable logs you're looking at, okay? The same thing with the diameter. You have to hold it 25 inches from your eye, level with the tree, and it tells you the diameter of that tree, okay? So basically, when you determine a volume, you have to have those two measurements. You have to have the diameter of the tree, and you have to have the merchantable height, okay? In terms of harvesting systems, this is kind of going into theoretically. I guess there's more than one harvesting system that you could use in any given situation. I would say 80 to 90% of the harvests that occur in this area is probably selective harvest. Some people term it as diameter limit harvest. Unfortunately, a lot of those selective harvests turns into what also they consider high grading. And what high grading is you're basically taking your best species in timber and you're leaving your weeds in the forest. Okay, so what does that do to your next generation or your next stand of timber? It does you no good. There's different landowners need to be aware that there's different techniques out there. There's something called a group selection, which is basically you're scattering out many clear cuts or regeneration harvests over the stand. And these openings are probably a ½ acre to 2 acres. So if someone has got aesthetics as their objective, if they're concerned with aesthetics, but they're also wanting to harvest timber and they're wanting to get more desirable species back in, a group selection might be an option that they could consider. Another option is what they call patch clear cut. It's basically a group selection but on a larger scale. Instead of your openings being a ½ acre to 2 acres, your openings are 2 to 5 acres in size. So it's just a matter of difference in scale. Well, the benefit of creating those miniature openings, if you think about it, you're creating more edge around those openings, which is also going to be very beneficial to wildlife. In a group selection, the openings are small enough where oak or where poplar may not dominate as much as if the opening was 5 acres. So if your main objective is you're trying to get oak to come back, which is kind of an intermediate species, and when I say intermediate species, I mean that it's a little shade tolerant, okay? It can withstand the shade just a little bit. Well, if you open it up too much and you're trying to get oak back, more than likely you're going to get cherry and yellow poplar, which are all shade intolerant species. They're going to jump on it and just outgrow it. So that's the whole reasoning behind group selection, is trying to minimize those openings to where oak will have a chance to occupy the site. Another method that you could implement is something called a shelter wood harvest. A shelter wood harvest, one of the main objectives of a shelter wood harvest is to establish oak in the forest. The one disadvantage of a shelter wood harvest is there's multiple harvests. The first harvest, you're going to take out maybe 10 to 20% of the main overstory trees, okay? But you want to leave some of your larger oak intact just to provide a seed source. You're also going to take out any mid-story trees, your maples, your black gum, sourwood, all your what we would consider almost junk species. You're going to take those out, okay? What you're doing is you're opening up sunlight, and you're wanting that sunlight to hit the ground because you're already going to have oak source there, and you're wanting to encourage that oak regeneration to start occurring. But say 8 to 10 years after that first harvest, you're going to have to come back and remove the rest of the trees that you left the first time, okay? And that's a shelter wood. And of course, you always have what they call a regeneration harvest, or some people term it as a clear cut. Your main objective of any clear cut or regeneration harvest is to regenerate the stand. And when I say regenerate the stand, you need to basically mow the yard with it. If you go in there and you take what we call a commercial clear cut, if you take everything commercially valuable, you're still leaving 4 to 6 inch weed species on the forest. So what those species are going to continue to do, their crowns are going to continue to get bigger, okay? Well, if you're leaving shade-tolerant species in the forest, it's only going to encourage more shade-tolerant species to come up. And that's the whole point. You're trying to release full sunlight into the ground. And a regeneration harvest done correctly, you could end up with 8 to 10,000 seedlings per acre just fighting, okay? From wildlife standpoint, they love that. There's enough cover for from 8 to 10 years out. Deer, turkey, love that. But the disadvantage, someone might be more concerned with aesthetics. It's so you have to weigh those options, or weigh those. You have to prioritize what you're wanting to get out of your forest, and you also need to consider scale. If you've only got 20 acres you're dealing with, you know, you might not want to see it regenerated completely. But one thing that I see a lot, if you've got a stand that's been select cut or basically high graded, you're left with black gum, red maple, sweet gum. You're left. So where's the next? Where are your best timber trees for your next stand? They're gone. Okay, so you need to ask yourself, what steps need to take place to get this current stand in a better condition? When you have a high graded stand, there's two options. Either you can regenerate the stand, or you can try to rehabilitate the stand. And in order to rehabilitate the stand, you have to have a good start. You've got to have some decent trees to try to baby a little bit. On this particular site, you've got a flat area up at the top. You've got a couple of flat areas, probably 20, 30 acres of flat areas. That might be more, a regeneration harvest could occur. You know, a logger is going to be able to get up there easier than to try to cut anything down in close. The one thing you definitely want to do on this area is protect this riparian area. In terms of harvesting systems along this area, I would not recommend a regeneration harvest. There's beech in the area. but beech is very beneficial to wildlife, so you might want to think about taking out some beech but leaving some beech. A selective harvest would probably be more beneficial along this riparian area, with an understanding that you would protect maybe no harvest or no machines from 200 to 300 foot from the creek up on each side, if that makes sense. And then, of course, you could do a regeneration harvest on the top part, or if your main objective is, if you want aesthetics, or if you want to practice uneven age management, you could do a group selection and create mini canopy gaps. Are there any questions? Have I confused you completely?
Why is beech beneficial for wildlife?
The beech nut that it produces. It's a great mass producer. Deer, turkey, they rely so much on oak trees and beech trees for their winter, for the winter time. When the American chestnut, 1 out of every 4 trees, 150 years ago was American chestnut, and so many animals relied on that as a mass producer every year. And when that just disappeared, you can imagine the significance. So the oaks started coming back more, and the theory is also that that's why we see more yellow poplar today, because the chestnut is no longer with us.
I want to ask you if you would say something about decline in stands, because red oak may decline at around 80 years, and white oak might start declining around 100. And when I hike on these state forests, which are right next to state parks, I tell my buddies, well, you see how we just left the really good, pretty timber and got in this ratty stuff? We're on state park now. So you got one area you manage the timber, the next area you just let nature take its course over however long.
It's if you hear the word oak decline, that basically refers to a number of things, and you can see that this year specifically because in 2007 we had the drought, and then 2008 we had the Easter freeze, and sometimes when those type of events occur, you won't see the effect of it until a couple years afterwards. Okay, so you're starting to see, especially in the red oaks, a decline. You'll start to see the crown start to die back, and that's mostly found, when I say red oak is predominantly a weaker species than white oak, especially scarlet oak, southern red oak, your northern red oak, your shoe-marred oak are a little bit stronger, but your scarlet oak and your southern reds, those two species of red oak are pretty prone to oak decline.
Is that what I said about right, about around 80 years? Is that?
Yeah, red oak, 80 to 90 years. Of course, white oak, the life expectancy of a white oak grown in ideal conditions, you can have 200- to 300-year-old trees. Red oak is not nearly going to be that much.
There's a term I tell landowners sometimes, that your timber is economically mature.
Right.
It needs to be cut.
And
it gets to a point where it starts slowing down.
What about this stand? What stage in life would you say a stand like this would be in? Y'all.
When was this purchased?
Purchased back in 1924, began being purchased. And we have some deeds dated as far back as 1900 on this particular property, but not for us, not for city.
So you're looking at 110-year-old trees, I'm sure. The poplars are going to be younger, I'm sure. Poplars are faster growing hardwood species. A lot of times, I'm sure a lot of landowners, if you come across a pure stand of yellow poplar, and a lot of times you look on a topo map and that was white, a lot of the topo data was taken probably in the 40s, 50s, and sometimes 60s. Well, if it was white then, that means it was usually basically in a cornfield or tobacco field. And a lot of times if you come across a pure stand of yellow poplar, that was basically a cornfield back in the 30s or 40s. And they just, when the jobs started occurring in the north, the farmers left, they abandoned those agriculture fields, and nature took its course, basically mimicking a regeneration harvest. Okay? That's another misconception of your timber species if your main objective is to grow productive timber and the right desirable species, a regeneration harvest is a very good option. But- yes, sir.
What is the market for this, you called it junk trees when you're cleaning everything?
The junk
out?
trees. Well,
I mean,
junk
you
is
gotta
a.
get somebody to cut that stuff to grab meat.
That's right. The market for pulpwood, I guess there is a market for pulpwood. It has improved over the past, I guess, 20, 30 years. Mike, I guess you could, Tom.
All I'm hearing from the loggers is that it was pretty well outrageously high last winter, and it's still pretty good right now.
Okay, so
Hardwood pulp pretty good.
that's good because maybe 25, 30 years ago there wasn't a market for that. And that might be an indication of what are our forests made of right now. If high grading has occurred for the past 30 to 40 years, you're getting more and more stands filled with undesirable species. Well, that tells you something. So the market maybe followed that. We were at a conference last week and they said, what would y'all think the #1 most common tree species is in Tennessee? Yellow poplar was second. That was a lot of people guessed that. The #1 most common tree species in Tennessee is red maple. That's so surprising. And if you think about it though, red maple is a shade-tolerant species. And the data that they showed, red maple, it wasn't even close to yellow poplar. Yellow poplar was far behind a pretty good bit. And the third species was black gum. So what does that tell us about, from a market standpoint, we need to have that in oak and poplar and ash and walnut. So I don't know. I have my own opinions on that, but that's a pretty interesting fact.
Those are not nearly as good wildlife species either, the red maple and
Correct.
and the black gum as folk oaks are.
If your main objective is aesthetics, fall color, they're beautiful. It's great to have those species. So it goes back to the landowner objectives. What do you want to do with your land?
We have a lot of popcorn beans around our house. I don't know if it's completely all over the farm. And then regular horn beans, and I think don't they make axe handles and things like that?
Blue beech and ironwood is what they call it. Anything mallet, handles, they're very good.
Is it wildlife?
I think hophorn bean, the birds will eat some of the seedlings. Yeah.
Okay, let me step in here just a minute. Chris, thank you very much for
Yeah, you're welcome.
a great presentation. Some of you in the viewing audience, perhaps, excuse me, who are not familiar with county forestry associations, let me just give you a little bit of background there. The state of Tennessee has a whole system of county forestry associations, of which Elk Valley Forestry is one of. And one of our charges from Tennessee Forestry is to help educate the local people in our areas, because more and more the legislators in Nashville and other capital cities around the country are from the city. And they don't have an agricultural background, they don't have a background in forestry. To say they don't care is maybe a stretch, but maybe it's not as important to them as it is to somebody else. So if we as County Forestry Association and you as residents in the area can talk to your legislators and tell them some of what you've learned about forestry, that helps educate them. The other thing, strictly on a local basis, is there are a lot of people coming along now who perhaps have inherited land that has timber on it. They're second generation, third generation families perhaps, and they may say, we've just inherited this farm, we've got a bunch of wood, timber on it, we want to cut those trees. How do we know what's in there? Well, Chris just told you, outlined in a very detailed way, you lost me in about 5 minutes. But that's okay. The point is, in listening to Chris, you can tell that a trained professional like him can come into your timber and using a very systematic approach, evaluate what you have, how much of it you have, figure out some pretty good estimate of what it's worth, because people will usually say, well, I've got this X number of acres of timber, what do you think it's worth? And trained professionals like Chris can give you some good background information so that if you make a decision to cut timber, he's just been through the different types of timber harvesting systems you can select from. There are various types of harvest systems that you can pick. And it all depends on what your goal is as a property owner. Some people want to get as much money as they can as quick as they can. Well, that's one way to do it. Others say, well, I've got teenagers that are going to be in college 5 years from now, 10 years from now. I'm going to need some money to help fund their education. Could I sort of postpone a timber harvest and cut some timber 10 years from now and give me some money that would be beneficial then? So again, professionals like Chris can give you guidance on how to do that, or how to do that. And the important question or important answer that you need to have is work through your area foresters like Tom Hall. We in the Elk Valley Forestry Association had the great benefit of working with Tom and his associates in the forestry division on a regular basis, and we can guide you to him, and that maybe indirectly guide you to a logger who can cut the timber in the way that you want to cut and help you benefit the most from the timberland you have. So this is part of the purpose of having somebody like Chris with us is to give you a technical presentation that you don't pick up all the details the first time through, obviously, but you can always go back to him. And in educational sense, you know, it's important to know where to look something up. Well, you can look up Chris and he can fill you in. So that's the important aspect of having a presentation of this type. So if there are no further questions on Chris's presentation, I'm going to ask Mike Sherrill to step in. Mike is with the Tennessee Department of Agriculture, and he works with water quality. Now, you've heard a water quality presentation with a description on what's in the water here, what this water is going to be used for, where it's going to go, and that type of thing. That's not what Mike is going to talk about. He's going to talk about, okay, if you've been in contact with Mike, Federal Public Utilities, and you have decided you want to do a timber harvest in here, what do you need to be concerned about with getting timber out of here without getting in trouble with the spring you have running out? So Mike Sherrill, if you'll step in here and talk to us.
What I'd like to do actually is go back down. We're headed back toward the chow, and that's always good.
Okay.
But Tom's got a little place picked out down there that I think will be nice, and we'll see something a little bit different maybe.
Okay.
Excuse me a minute, Mike.
Yeah.
The cooks are wondering about timing on putting the burgers on a grill.
Yeah, that's not one of our stuff.
You guys can take it home.
I don't know what, it might have been one time, but no. The two things that you signed up for in our office, put in.
I've got one.
Okay, thank you, Don. This is Mike Sherrill. Mike is with the Tennessee Department of Agriculture, and he's going to talk to us about water quality. And as I mentioned, excuse me, I've got a little bit of a frog in my throat here. Mentioned earlier, this is not related directly to the water quality presentation you got from the city, but it's what if you were going to cut some timber in here and you needed to get it out, how would you get the timber out without polluting or damaging these spring branches? So I'm going to turn it over to Mike to tell you about that.
Well, I'm going to tell you just a little bit about who I am and what we do, generally speaking, and then we can, if y'all want to ask some specific questions, that'll be good too. I work for the Division of Forestry, which, as all these other people do, and they are also, the Division of Forestry is a part of the Department of Agriculture. I just wanted to clarify that. So we all work for the same bunch. But what is our role as a Division of Forestry in protecting water quality from activities such as logging and other silvicultural or timber forest-related activities? And we have a water quality section which I represent, and what I do is, what we do is we train people, train loggers and resource professionals in water quality law. There is a water quality law in the state of Tennessee on the books that's enforced by the Department of Environment and Conservation, which, by the way, we used to be in. We're now in agriculture. But so we train people on what is and is not okay in accordance with Tennessee water quality law. And we also train them in something we call best management practices. And that is a part of our master logger program that we give to loggers. But what are best management practices? You know, probably if you're a farmer or a construction guy or a logger, you realize that it's pretty well impossible to do your job and not have any negative impact. For example, if I get a teaspoon of dirt in that stream, that's technically a violation of water quality law. Is it possible to cross this stream and not get a teaspoon of dirt in it? Not possible. So best management practices are, for lack of a better way to put it, the way to do the job the best and avoid as many of the problems and pitfalls with water quality. Also, to avoid degradation of the land resource. So that's kind of what we're about. So that's part of my job, or part of our program's job, is to train people how to do those things correctly. Another part of the program is that we are here to monitor logging and forestry activities and make sure that things are going as they should. So guys like these guys you see in uniform all around you, Tom and Chris and all these other guys, they might be out there, some of them, doing courtesy checks on loggers. Could we look at your site and see if everything's okay, kind of stuff. And if they find problems, we work with them to fix them. Another part of the job would be if one of you or anybody calls me and says, I got a complaint, this guy's not doing the right thing, he's violating water quality law. We have to investigate 100% of those. And if we find them to be in violation or doing something they really shouldn't do, we work with them to try to fix it. If it's bad enough, we immediately bring in the enforcement people, which would be the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation. And if somebody is really disregarding things, or have had a past history of numerous problems, or if the violation's really, really bad, they might get a fine on the front end, or they might get a fine or something like that if they refuse to fix the problem. So part of our job is training, part of our job is monitoring and dealing with complaints. A third leg of that job would be the field advisement part of it, which not only myself, but also these other forestry guys will go out with loggers upon their request and talk to them about how would be a good way, let's say, to cross a stream. or something of that sort, or do any of these things that might be a problem with the BMPs or water quality. So a lot of times, you know, I don't know everything about water quality, and when I first started this job, there was a whole lot that I didn't know and didn't understand. And a lot of people are like that, and I always tell a little story about my granddad. He really wanted to do things right. He had an environmental type heart. He had a heart for the land. He was a logger. And one day I noticed that he was out on the bridge over a creek about the size of this one. He pulled out on the bridge to change the oil in his trucks and stuff. And I said, well, why are you doing that? He said, well, I can just pour it over in the creek when I get through. So he always pulled out on the bridge and poured the oil over in the creek. This was a long time ago. And I said, I was finishing high school or something like that at the time. And I said, well, you know, that's not a good thing to do. And he said, well, why not? And I didn't have a really good answer. I said, well, you know, as best I could, I said, the oil's persistent for a long time. It hurts the organisms in the stream and some of these kind of things. And so I guess along about that time, we started seeing some oil spills in different parts of the world. They were coming on TV. He started paying a little more attention to it. And I want you to know that he actually stopped doing that. He would pull out on that bridge, catch the oil in a pan, and he'd take it out in the woods and pour it out. That's a true story. Now, the truth of the matter is, I guess it did less damage to pour it out in the woods than it did to pour it in the stream, for sure. And a lot of things I didn't understand about our water quality law and the trouble that loggers get into. One time I asked the TDEC guy when we had a guy skidding up down a stream, you know, and we were fixing immediately all the bad problems associated with his interests. But there was a lot of clean gravel in the stream and you know, where he'd skidded. And I said, what's the problem here? And he said, well, you see the clean gravel there. I said, yeah, there's some clean gravel there. So what's the problem? And he explained to me that they would put a net down and kick the gravel around, and they'd catch the organisms that jumped up off the bottom and went in the net. And there where it was clean, there wouldn't be many. But above the logging site, where the gravel was all dirty, when they kicked the gravel, they would catch all kind of critters in the net. So it did make a difference, and I'm glad I asked the question, because I got an understanding of what the importance of some of this stuff is. Obviously, well, you know, we as water quality people, we're known by a lot of names. You can call me a water quality forester, or you know, some people call me things that I won't repeat. But anyway, mud police, whatever you want to call us. But the main emphasis on what we're doing, there are a lot of little variations to water quality law, but the main emphasis is just keeping dirt out of the stream from a logging standpoint. And I'd like to tell you something at this point in time, because a lot of people have a question about cutting practices. And the act of severing wood from a stump, whether you cut one tree or thousands per acre, in and of itself really doesn't cause what we call point source pollution. And that's dirt that you can see running across the ground in an appreciable amount to the stream. The problem that we deal with is almost wholly created by bad roads, skid trails, roads too close to the stream, and these sort of things, logging decks too close to the stream, or any situation where disturbed ground can cause overland flow to enter the stream. And so that's really what we pay a lot of attention to. There are other things like woody material that loggers might leave in a stream that would also be a violation of water quality law, but the serious stuff really is polluting the stream with the soil that I deal with more than anything else. So the majority of our program is trying to teach these guys how not to do that, or how to minimize that. And one of the things that we'll talk about right now, because we're right next to this stream, is we would like to see in our Jerry, did we get any of those books out here, the BMP books?
I got them down there. I was gonna give them
Okay. You can get a BMP book if you want it, Best Management Practice Manual. It's about that thick. It's got a lot of good information in it, and Anyway, in the book you'll find terms like SMZ. And the SMZ, we government people tend to talk in terms of letters and things like that. So, but SMZ stands for Streamside Management Zone. And we like to see a zone. I think Chris talked about something similar a little while ago when he said riparian zone. Well, that's a little bit different thing, but certainly a lot of times what's right next to the stream would be a riparian zone. But that streamside management zone right next to the stream, we'd like to see a zone protected there from equipment use. The thought there is if you don't scratch the ground up, then you're not going to have dirt in the stream right next to the stream if you don't scratch the ground up right next to the stream. So normally, as the book states, if you get a book, the minimum distance that we suggest you leave away from the stream untouched would be about 25 feet. Now that's on flat land, and what we ask for increases as we develop a little more slope like you have here and certainly over there. And we have a chart there that says so much slope, so much SMZ. Now, if you're a landowner and I told you that you can't cut any of those trees 100 foot from the stream because of a certain amount of slope, or even 25, where is your best timber often located? It's sometimes right next to the stream, and it can be thousands of dollars per acre, can't it? Whose land is that, and whose timber is it? Well, in theory it is. If we don't pay our taxes, they take it away from it. So many states have laws that say you just can't touch that. You can call it yours, but you can't touch it. Our program is a voluntary program, and we're here to assist people with the knowledge of how to do that and still get their resource out. And one thing we suggest is if you got some high value wood next to the stream, if the logger will go in there and pick the time of the year when it's dry, access it in the right way, do a lot of cable pulling instead of getting right next to the bank of the stream. Many ideas that we can give him how to get some of that wood out and not destroy or damage that soil to cause overland flow. So from a technical standpoint, number one, removing the trees really don't cause the flow. We've discussed that earlier. So it's technically possible under the best circumstances to remove every tree and not cause dirt to enter the stream in any appreciable amount. So I think that's a really good situation. It's a good law, and we've made real good progress with our loggers in terms of not getting dirt in the stream. But that goes back again to the fact that we're going to continue to monitor our results, not just with individual loggers on a one-on-one basis, but also our logging statewide, which we do that with a every 3-year survey kind of deal. And it's important not only to protect water quality in terms of dirt entering it, but also protect these to make sure that more people are putting in streamside management zones. And I'm not completely satisfied with where we are, but we are progressing. And so that's one thing we do. Another thing we're real particular about is our roads and skid trails. And often you'll see maybe a piece of ground like this, maybe not quite as steep, and the only thing the logger can do kind of is come straight down the bank into the stream, cross it, and come up the other side. Well, that's kind of a bad situation. And we try to find a way out of that every way we can. And if that's the only situation, then we tell them ways to minimize impact. And we've got numerous ones that can be used. And bottom of the hollow logging is another situation that we'd rather not ever see, where you have just a steep hollow and they're accessing all the wood by skidding right along the stream, that sort of thing. So, you know, unfortunately, back to what you were nodding your head about, you own the timber. And sometimes there are places in this state, and many places, that the topography is such that that's the only possible option, is to access it through the bottom of the hollow logging. So I think our programs where we teach guys how to do that, minimizing impact, are extremely valuable. You know, one of the questions that I asked the sixth graders a couple of weeks ago when we talked to them was, you know, if you do something to damage the aquatic life here, whether it's putting too much mud in the stream and drowning them basically, or whatever, how far down does that impact carry? And the answer is all the way. You know, so it's kind of important stuff. When we get next to the stream or anywhere near the stream where dirt might be possibly entering the stream, for sure we like to try to retire our scars on the land correctly with things like water bars, brush dams, sowing and mulching, and some of these kind of things. And we've got some tried and true ways that we teach people how to do that. And you know, typically, for example, you know, your water bars should start at the very top of the hill, and we have a system to explain where they need to be and how to construct them so that every bit of water that hits that water bar is turned off into the leaves, and that's a filter. That's another good point. The stream site management zone is basically a filter. And if you did have a little mud running overland across here to these leaves, and it was only that little bit of mud that is left after the last water bar was successfully doing its job, and that little bit of bare dirt from that water bar to the end, if it was flowing across a 25-foot filter, we tell them, that's probably good enough to filter it out. And this is a filter. Weeds, vines, leaves, not bare dirt. And so, you know, we go into pretty good detail, and I know that you guys have seen Old County roads and farm activities and all that sort of thing that do things differently. But when it comes to our loggers, and when it comes to water quality law, they're kind of held to a different standard, which is good. And by the way, let me give a little plug for forestry all over the United States. I think the statistics are that less than 1% of all water pollution comes from forestry activities. You know, it may seem like a lot of times when you see a big clear cut or something, you're thinking, oh, that's got to pollute, or when you see one bad job, let's say, and you're seeing dirt in a stream, you think, this is terrible, it must have a big impact. We try to jump right out there on that to begin with, but in general, there's just not that as much of it as you might think. That's pretty much all I have in terms of a general explanation of what we're doing. Do y'all have any questions at this point?
Mike, if you remove trees down this riparian zone, how will it increase or decrease the volume of water?
Well, you know, the riparian, let's just go to the watershed example instead of the riparian zone, because if you take a few trees out, it might be negligible. But if you had 500 acres or 1,000 acres or 2,000 acres in a watershed and you cut all the trees, as a general rule, it's going to increase the flow significantly. And we have a lot of complaints, especially in Middle Tennessee, where there has been some cutting and there's some very steep land, and people are getting mad because, probably because it's just rained a lot lately. But sure enough, the flow is increased with some of the cutting for a couple of years until things grow back up. What happens is trees are pumping a lot of water out of the ground. And if you take away the pumps, you know, even though the sun's bearing down on that stuff, still the trees were taking out more. So that's a generalization, but that's kind of the way it works, I think. One of the things we learned early in school is if you plant, if you take an understocked wetland area or type area and you plant something like loblolly pine, It grows real fast, occupies the site really well, and pretty well pumps year-round because it's foliated year-round. You can actually dry land up that was never dry before. So,
Mike, I'd just like to say, for people that live here, they know that it's somebody that comes down logging, questions how to cross the creek. You can look at the reports and know that Jerry Mann gets there a lot more than I do.
yeah.
I just wanted to say that. And also, the guy next to Jerry used to be a technician here, Billy Womack. And this guy right here, I don't know how many people know him. He's probably worked this area. Bobby Chambers, he's a forester and worked in Shelbyville prior to me coming there. And Bobby knows trees real good right now. He knows trees good.
Any other questions?
I've got one. I've noticed that Coldwater Creek especially has a lot of gravel bars. If you go in there and mine the gravel out, does that make a major impact on the stream?
I would not think it would. One of the things that's interesting in Middle Tennessee, you see these creeks just full of gravel over back toward Tennessee River is what I keep referring to Middle Tennessee. You see creeks with a lot of gravel, and that gravel comes out of the hollows, it gets in the creek, it moves around, you know, and I wouldn't think it would have much of an impact. I know it. Well, I'm not sure that it make any. Yeah. Now, anytime you're getting out there in the creek, that's actually probably illegal. You know, if you're on the bank, that's also a permitted activity that you need to talk to TDEC about. And some of our loggers get gravel, and depending on which TDEC person, Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation, person you talk to, one will say that's one kind of a little bit of difference in what they've said to me about it. But generally speaking, if you're in the stream, you're violating the law. And you have to have a permit to get it on the stream bank. Is everybody kind of that's the way I understand it?
Well, that's different for own farm use.
Yes, I can address that too. What I was told by Chad Augustine with TDEC, Columbia office, if a farmer or landowner is getting it for use on the property and he's getting it himself, then that's probably covered under a general permit. Yeah, not a permit where you would have to call them and get it on a case-by-case basis, but a general permit. And loggers, some of our foresters have argued the point that when a logger does that, it's also, and the guy at TDEC told me no, it's not.
If you're doing it on your property,
Yeah.
you're covered under general permit. If somebody else is doing it, or if you're hauling somewhere else, then call TDEC.
So if a contractor's doing it on your behalf, and
Probably
even putting it on your road,
Probably ought to call TDEC.
and who are you with me?
I'm with the NRCS.
Okay, all right.
And we get that question every
Yeah.
couple of months.
Yeah. Well, I don't deal with it that much, but they occasionally ask me that.
Dr. Harwell, I think Chris has got a little bit more, maybe he's talking about butternut down here, or I don't know if he's got anything else, but he wants.
Okay, let me just say one other quick thing. I'm not a good speaker this morning. Thank you, Mike, for a good presentation.
You're welcome.
One of the things Mike didn't address completely is the Master Logger Program. And the cap I've got on happens to been there, done that, have the cap to prove it.
Yeah. I'll talk about that.
I went through the Master Logger Program, not because I ever intend to be a logger, but because I could maybe help me see the logger's point of view in the County Forestry Association. And one of the things that they spend the whole day, whole class session about is talking about best management practices, which Mike covered. Safety is another whole program and so forth. And this is just to say that the loggers are good people. They're trying to do their jobs. and they're participating now in the Master Logger training course. They're learning about a lot of these things that Mike was just talking about, because they want to know the right way to do things and not harm the environment. So I think the Master Logger course is a super course, and with people's help like Mike and other speakers that they have to come in and present those, it's really helped our loggers improve the type of work that they do. And I'll thank you for the loggers. I'm not a logger. I think we've got a couple of loggers here today, but that's a very good course, and thank you for participating in that. Thank you for helping us out today. And as Tom pointed out, Chris wants to talk to us about a special type of tree that's found in this area. So we'll move back to Mike.
Before we do, let me since I was negligent in not explaining Master Logger, let me talk about that just a moment. The Tennessee Forestry Association, the Tennessee Division of Forestry, and the University of Tennessee are partners in the Tennessee Master Logger program. Master Logger is initially a 5-day course, and I teach the best management practices portion of that, which talks about best management practices and water quality law. And there are other courses, silviculture, which is manipulation of the forest to achieve your desired objectives. That's one course. Business, safety, and one of our guys might know what the other one is. Do you know?
CPR.
Well, CPR is not a part of safety. Okay. All important stuff, and they learn a lot in it. And then every couple of years or every 3 years, they have to go back for a continuing education thing, which we give them a little more, for my part, on water quality and address some, got a separate slideshow for that and that sort of thing. So through this program and our monitoring and all the things we do, we've seen a steady, with our 3-year program, becoming statistically better in a measurable way. And so that's Master Logger. And if y'all want to, we can go on over and see what Chris has got to show us now.
How many do you have?
Should be 30. Well, this is another reason why this is such a unique area. When we first came out here, we found that right behind me, this is called a white walnut or a butternut. These are pretty rare, and there's actually a fungus that's causing, or a canker that's killing this species. And it was first discovered, I think, in 1967 up in Wisconsin. And it seemed to me that the farther south that you go, I think you find more. I don't know if that has to do something with the fungus or the canker or what, but if you can tell the difference between the white walnut and the black walnut, what jumps out at you is just the white stripes in the bark. It jumps out at you. But another obvious difference, the fruit itself, a black walnut, it's round like a basketball. The white walnut or the butternut, they're oval, okay? They're like a football. Some of the older people I've talked to, they said that they used to use the white walnut or the butternuts more in baking. It has a higher oil content than just regular black walnut. And supposedly, of course, the Confederates were, I think the Yankees would refer to the Confederates as butternuts, just because of their uniforms would actually eventually become more of a khaki color. And this, if you can dye this, use this as a dye to get that color, and that's what they would call the Confederates butternuts. But one significant point is, about a month ago they found a disease, 1,000 cankers disease in Knoxville, that's specifically affecting black walnut, but they're not 100% sure if it's not going to affect the butternut, such it's in the walnut family. So if you've got white walnut or butternut that's already been stressed a whole lot by the butternut canker, and then this new disease has come in, it doesn't look good for white walnut to continue to be around. And you can see signs of this one has been affected, the cankers. You can look for black spots, and a black ooze will come out of it. And the fungus, whenever it rains, it starts from the top and then it kind of works. A rain will spread the fungus, so rain or wind. So in terms of the wood value, it's not as commercially valuable as black walnut. It's got more of a tannish grain to it, but woodworkers, wood carvers, they love it. So there is a use of it, and if you happen to find any on your property, they recommend, if it has a canker, call the forester to come out and take a look at it. They recommend you to remove the tree, so the canker won't spread. But I would always, it's hard to say cut it down when you've got a seed source that'll continue to be around. I would keep it. Personally, if I had one on my property, I'd just like to have it just as it's pretty unique and it's rare. And if you have a good crown, it'll produce nuts and you can use them for baking or whatever. But I just wanted to point that out. That's kind of a rare species you don't see every day. That's white walnut or butternut. So.
Now that I've touched that, I don't need to go back and touch my trees.
Okay, any questions? If not, I think there are hamburgers and hot dogs ready for us, so we'll go back across the road and have a little lunch.
They're a beast.
I got rid of them. Grow right over.
Yes,
Teal
yes,
over.
yes,
What's the best way to kill privet?
Well, Mr. Harrell, it was a good day today, and maybe you want to wrap up and give everybody at home again what this day was all about.
Well, we want to thank you. This is Don Counts. For those of you who are in the viewing audience from Federal Public Utilities, came and brought some of his compatriots today, and we're always glad to have them, glad to have your input and inviting us in on the property that you have. This was a very special opportunity that we wanted to take advantage of in our field day system, and we couldn't have asked for a prettier day, a nice day for a walk in the woods. And we've had some good presentations today on water quality as the water's coming out of the springs from the standpoint of the Federal Public Utilities point of view. The other side of that is what happens to that wonderful water if the logging business gets involved and happens to pollute the streams. We had some information on how to evaluate stand of timber, how to harvest, what type of harvest you might want to do, how you could increase some income from it and so forth. So I think we've had a good program. We've got lunch being served over here to the side. We'll do lunch, and then people are free to walk around and ask questions, and if not, they are free to go whenever they want to. And thanks again, Don, for coming today and having us on your show.
Okay.
We know you're a major show man, so we appreciate that, and thank you very much. Encourage anyone that is interested in attending one of our field days in the future. Again, we have one in the fall and one in the spring, usually around April, May, and around October. So just get in touch with one of our members of the Elk Valley Forestry Association, and we'd be glad to direct you to that, send you a flyer on it, and let you know when we're going to have one and invite you to come. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Harrell. And from Teal Hollow, beautiful Teal Hollow, Fayetteville, or just outside of Fayetteville, as right here on the side of the road on Teal Hollow. We appreciate y'all watching here on Fayetteville Public Utilities Channel 6, and we'll see you back in here next time.